Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty huge. We're going deep into the connections, the really fascinating, maybe even unsettling links between our biology, chronic stress, and, well, the very idea of free will. We've pulled together insights mainly from really compelling analysis, stress, empathy, and the illusion of free will. Our plan, to connect the dots. We're starting with hard science, how stress physically rewires things, and ending up with this massive philosophical question that honestly could shake up how you think about success, failure, justice, everything. Okay, let's get into it.
It's definitely a journey because you can't really talk about free will in a vacuum, right? We first need to grapple with the biology. The source material really pushes this idea that maybe many of our choices aren't these independent acts we imagine. They could be. Well, more like the outcome of our wiring. So we need to understand the biological constraints, first stress, early life stuff, before we can even touch the bigger philosophical implications of determinism.
Okay, so let's start there with stress, chronic stress, the kind that's just always there in modern life. The research is pretty clear on this, isn't it? When people are under constant stress, it tanks their empathy. And their prosocial behavior, too. It's not just feeling worn out. It actually makes us less, helpful, less tuned in to others.
Exactly. And this isn't just like a general feeling. It's neurology. We know the mechanism. Those chronic stress hormones, cortisol is the famous one, they directly impact a specific brain region. It's called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC.
The ACC. Sounds technical. For those of us not wearing lab coats, what's the ACC doing? What's its job?
You could think of it as maybe the brain's social thermostat, or perhaps its empathy hub. It's really involved in regulating emotions, spotting when things go wrong, and crucially, processing other people's emotional states. So when that part of the brain is constantly bathed in stress chemicals, its performance drops. It's like trying to run complex social software on a computer that's always, overheating. The whole system just defaults to self-preservation, and that means less capacity for those outward-looking social skills, more self-focus.
Right, which immediately flags that evolutionary mismatch idea the source talks about.
Yeah.
That stress response system you described, it wasn't built for this, was it? Evolution designed it for short-term physical threats.
Absolutely. A lion jumping out, a sudden flood, things that required immediate, intense physical action for a few minutes.
And then it would be over. The system resets.
Precisely. It's brilliant for that quick burst. Floods you with energy, sharpens focus for survival. But the problem today is our lions are different. They're job worries, money stress, social media. They're psychological, they're everywhere, and they often just don't end.
So our modern anxieties are constantly ringing this ancient alarm bell.
They are, and keeping it ringing. That chronic activation is actively detrimental. Instead of saving us when it's prolonged, the system starts degrading the very brain parts, like the ACC, that help us be cooperative, empathetic beings. Your ability to pause, to choose kindness. It's literally being hampered by the background hum of modern stress. That's the first biological hit against pure free will. Our environment is physically shaping our capacity for social choice.
Okay, so that covers how ongoing stress affects us right now. But the source goes deeper, doesn't it? Back to the very beginning. We need to shift gears a bit into developmental biology, because this is where it suggests the story starts way, way earlier.
Right. This is where we move from the immediate environment to the foundational wiring. The analysis puts a lot of weight on socioeconomic status, SES, in early childhood, like before age 3. Your early environment stability, nutrition, parental stress levels, even language exposure, it all have a direct, measurable impact on how a child's brain physically develops. This isn't just culture, it's brain architecture.
Wow. So not just about having more or fewer toys, but about the actual physical structure being built.
Absolutely. And the source connects this directly to really fundamental skills, things like impulse control, that ability to stop yourself, to choose the harder thing now for a bigger reward later.
Yeah.
That pause between feeling something and acting on it. We tend to think of that as just willpower.
But the research suggests this willpower, this personal responsibility, is actually biologically sculpted by circumstances totally outside a kid's control. Is that right?
That's the core argument, yes. If you grow up in an environment that's chaotic, unpredictable, maybe threatening, which often correlates with lower SES, your brain wires itself differently. It prioritizes quick reactions, immediate survival. It doesn't get the chance, the luxury perhaps, to build up that strong, patient prefrontal cortex needed for really robust impulse control. The programming tilts towards short-term thinking.
Can you give us an example? What does that look like in practice, say, when someone's an adult?
Okay, think about two people facing a really tough exam or maybe a challenging financial choice. Person A grew up in a stable environment that fostered strong impulse control. Their brain wiring makes it physically less effortful to delay gratification, to sit and study for hours, or to save money rather than spend it. Person B, whose early SES background led to more reactive short-term wiring, is literally fighting against their own brain structure to achieve that same level of focus or patience. It feels harder because neurologically it is harder. The choice to succeed isn't made on a level playing field because the biological tools are different.
So the ability to make what society calls a good choice, work hard, save, wait for the reward, might largely depend on brain wiring set up by factors we never chose, like our parents' income.
Yeah.
That's quite something.
It sets up this powerful chain reaction, this deterministic cascade. These early biologically ingrained differences in impulse control really lay the groundwork for later patterns of behavior. If your basic capacity for self-regulation is shaped so heavily by things you had no say in, then the argument for determinism that our actions are basically preset by prior causes gets, well, pretty compelling.
Which pushes us right into that huge philosophical territory. If you combine the way chronic stress erodes empathy in adulthood with these deep-seated differences in impulse control from childhood SES, then we have to face the source's most challenging claim head-on, that free will is basically a myth. Whoa, hold on, is that not maybe a step too far? Even with all these influences, isn't the human mind incredibly complex? Isn't there some room for conscious choice, for overriding the programming?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But the deterministic perspective, drawing from this biology, would argue that the complexity is just a more intricate set of causes and effects. The argument goes like this. If your development, your genes, your brain wiring, your ongoing stress levels, if all that is dictating your responses and choices, then what feels like free will? That's just your conscious mind catching up and creating a story to explain the biologically inevitable outcome. True, independent agency just doesn't seem to fit in that picture. Your choice becomes the end result of a long biological and environmental chain reaction.
Okay, that's genuinely hard to sit with. If we even entertain that idea that free will's an illusion, that our paths are largely set by biology and environment, the implications for how we run our world, they're massive. What's a so what here?
Oh, the ripple effects are enormous. The first big one is probably our whole system of criminal justice.
How so? How does it change things like punishment?
Well, right now, our justice system rests heavily on the idea of blame, culpability, that someone freely chose to do wrong, so they deserve punishment. But if you see harmful actions as the sort of predictable result of a brain shaped by disadvantage and stressed by environment, then the whole concept of moral blame starts to dissolve. The question shifts, doesn't it? It stops being, did they choose wrong, and becomes, what biological and environmental factors led to this, and how did we, as a society, fail to address them?
So instead of punishment based on blame, the focus becomes what?
Right.
Risk management, prevention, treating the behavior like a symptom of something deeper that needs fixing.
Exactly. The source implies a radical shift towards tackling the root causes, maybe through support, interventions, changing environments, rather than just retribution. If the wiring led to the action, maybe the failure lies in not addressing the wiring or the factors that shaped it.
Okay, flip side. What about the good stuff?
Yeah.
Personal accomplishment. So much of our identity is tied up in what we achieve, right? We see it as proof of our hard work, our choices.
That whole narrative of individual grit and willpower takes a serious knock. From this deterministic viewpoint, if you succeed, it's not primarily because you chose better or worked harder. It's because you were fortunate. You got the beneficial early wiring from a good SES background, you had the support systems, you avoided the most damaging stressors. Success becomes less a badge of personal virtue and more the likely outcome of having won the biological and environmental lottery.
And that leads straight into challenging this core idea, especially in some cultures, of meritocracy, the American dream even.
Right. Meritocracy assumes that talent and effort, which we think people choose to apply, are what determines success. This biological perspective really pours cold water on that. If factors totally outside your control, like your childhood SES shaping your impulse control or your level of chronic stress exposure, are actually the main drivers of outcomes, then the idea that the best just naturally rise to the top based on pure merit looks, well, shaky. What we often label as merit, things like discipline, focus, the ability to delay gratification, might actually be, in large part, a biological and environmental inheritance. It suggests the starting line isn't just uneven. The race itself might be largely predetermined by the equipment you started with.
Wow. Okay, that was a lot to unpack. A really intense deep dive. We started right down at the neural level, looking at how the anterior cingulate cortex gets worn down by the mismatch between ancient stress responses and modern life. Then we track back to early development, arguing that socioeconomic status isn't just about resources, but about building the fundamental brain wiring for things like impulse control, setting a path for future choices. And finally, we use all that biological evidence to confront this really provocative idea that free will might be an illusion, which in turn forces us to rethink huge societal structures like criminal justice and how we even define personal success or merit.
And it leaves us with a really critical question, moving beyond just assigning blame or credit. If our biology and environment significantly steer us towards certain outcomes, meaning some people start with profound disadvantages baked into their very wiring, what does that mean for our collective responsibility? What's the new ethical duty we have to create systems that account for and maybe compensate for these predetermined disadvantages? If free will is less powerful than we thought, perhaps our obligation to build a fairer environment becomes much, much greater.
A truly profound thought to carry with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the intricate and maybe quite challenging connections between our bodies, our stress, and the enduring puzzle of free will.